All right, hi everybody. Um, let's see how this works. I'm going to talk about Feldman's article now, Reasonable Religious Disagreements, and I'm going to break it into two parts. So in the first part, I'm going to just set up the question and set out some definitions. And then in the second part, I'll talk about his argument for the conclusion that there can't be reasonable disagreements. Okay, so what Feldman is interested in this article is the question of what we should think about cases where we realize that even though other people are just as smart as we are, they have just the same information, they're just as good at reasoning as we are, sometimes they come to different conclusions. And the kind of case that he's interested in is the case of religion, which we're all familiar with. And we know that many people have many different beliefs about the existence of God or the nature of God, if you do believe in God, and all kinds of related things. So what Feldman is interested in is, in this kind of case, where say, for example, you're an atheist, which like he is, and you talk to someone else who's a theist, you realize that both of you have thought hard about the question and yet you disagree. What should you think about that and how should you respond to that situation? So Feldman starts off by dismissing a couple of responses. He says, one way that you could respond is with intolerance. You could say, just you're wrong, I'm right, and that's all there is to it, and be kind of dismissive of the other person. Obviously, that is not a very good response because it doesn't take seriously the fact that you know that the other person is smart, you know that they're thoughtful. So aside from just being rude and inappropriate, that response seems to ignore a lot of information that you have about the person. So you need to take the other person's view seriously. That's an important thing. Another bad response is what he calls relativism, which says basically we're both right, or one thing is true for me and another thing is true for you. And Feldman says that's not a good response either because it just doesn't make sense. He thinks, sure, in some cases, it might turn out that maybe we're using our words differently or we didn't really understand what each other meant. And it turns out that, once we clear that up, we'll see that really we do agree. That's not the case with a lot of real life disagreements. So in a lot of cases, there really is just one proposition that we disagree about where, for example, I think it's true and you think it's false. So one person thinks there is a God, another person thinks there's not a God, and they're using the words in exactly the same way. They know exactly what each other means, and they still disagree. Okay, so those are two bad ways to respond. But what's the right way? So what kind of attitude should you have towards the other person? Should you think that their belief is rational? And what kind of attitude should you have towards the proposition that you're disagreeing about? So is it rational for you to hold on to that belief if you think that the other person's belief is rational? So that's where Feldman is going to go next. Okay, so let's just set up the question more precisely, and then I'll start a new video to talk about his response. Okay, so one thing that Feldman wants to do is talk about cases where people have all the same evidence, but rationally hold different beliefs. And he wants to know if that kind of a case is possible. So Feldman wants to focus on what he calls genuine disagreements between epistemic peers. And he's going to particularly focus on cases where they share their evidence. And so let me just get a few definitions of those terms up because those are technical terms for him. Okay, so here are the definitions that he's using to make this question more precise. So a genuine disagreement is one in which everybody is using words in the same way. So there really is one proposition that people disagree about. There's no misunderstanding. Epistemic peers. This means people who are roughly equally intelligent and equally good at reasoning. And then when he asks whether people are reasonable, he clarifies that he doesn't just mean like you haven't made any obvious mistakes in reasoning. He means you haven't made any mistakes. And so using these terms, he can clarify his question. And what he wants to know is, can epistemic peers who share all their evidence have a reasonable, genuine disagreement? Okay, I'll stop this video now and we'll address that question in the next video.